So I don't know if anybody's seen this experiment. I remember as undergraduate work. They had these, I think they were tomatoes, but they're in a long line. They're grown in water, and every single one had one nutrient missing out of the 16. And just to see what the symptoms are, and they all varied. Everything that's missing had a particular symptom, but if you pulled it out, the plant's going to get sick. Okay. So the pH comes back. Now, what does pH stand for?
Potential hydrogen.
Potential, or the power of H, right? A lot of times you have the potential hydrogen. So what does hydrogen have to do with anything? I know we're not chemists. So what's going on in the soil? When your pH is, first of all, what's neutral pH?
7.
7. What's considered acidic?
Less than 7.
Less than 7. So it's kind of it's a weird thing. And it's an inverse relationship. So as the pH drops, the acidity increases, right? That's the way it's working. And it's on a log scale. It's on a log base 10 scale. So is 6, if you had a pH of 7 and you have a pH of 6, how many more times neutral, or how much more acidic is a 6 than a 7? One time?
10, isn't it?
10 times. So that's why a lot of times when you see 7.1, 7.2, but you say, oh, I've got a pH of 6 and neutral is 7, that's okay. No, not really. It's 10 times more acidic. So you have to keep that in relationship. But ideally, just for everyone's general knowledge, what is the ideal pH? If you were to try to pick a pH that you'd like to have.
6.5 to 7.2.
Yeah, I like to say yeah, and that's probably about right, in between 6.8. If I'm looking at a sample, I look at, if you get a pH reading of 6.8, you feel like, hey, you know what, that's pretty good. And the reason why I think I had these in the wrong order, but I can find, there, right here. So, looking at this, so here's 4.0, which is alkaline. Is that alkaline or acidic?
Acidic.
Super acidic. Okay. Here's neutral. And here's all these other, here's the first 3 that we're talking about. There's sulfur, calcium, magnesium. But what happens when you start, this is the availability, this bandwidth is the availability of that micronutrient. What happens when you start getting alkaline? What happens?
Becomes less available.
It becomes less available, right? So when you get a pH around 7.5, what are we missing?
Iron, manganese, boron,
Copper and zinc. But these two, I don't think it's coincidental that they're tied together right up here together, because these are the two, once these drop out, because we already established that, if you're trying to grow a plant and it's missing one thing, it's going to be sick. It's going to show some symptoms. So as soon as you get up here around 7.5, you start dropping out your iron and your manganese. You don't see this too much, but these are, iron is probably the most common, manganese the second. So when you get a pH down around here at 6.5, between 6.5 and 7, right through here, if you go through the whole list, they're all available. They're all available, every single one. So that's why the soil sample doesn't list out how much iron, manganese, and all that stuff you have in there. Because they do give you the pH, and you can make some assumptions that if your pH is around here, then that stuff's available, because it's all, and they just need traces. They just need such a little amount. So if they just have a little bit, then they'll grow just fine. So you don't have to have every one of them, but your pH has to be right. Okay, so that's the way you can make some assumptions based on your pH. I don't really care that much about even the phosphorus unless it's just off the charts, really high. I'm not worried too much about the potassium. Matter of fact, if I send a soil sample in, the only thing I look at is the pH. I don't really look at anything else. Because at least in our soils, because we're fertilizing anyway. They're getting everything they need. But if their pH is low or high, and we tend to be where around here most of the time.
acidic.
No, the other way. We have a tendency to go to it. Most of the time, yeah, because of our base, a lot of our base soils, and there's some variability, but our base soil is made up of what? Limestone, and limestone, calcium carbonate, it always wants to bring their pH up. So usually we're trying to bring it down. We're trying to bring the pH down. So, if you go out and take a soil sample from a lawn, would you just take 1 or would you take 10? 10. And then what would you do with them?
Combine them?
Mix it all together, right? That's right. So you can kind of get a representative sample of the whole lawn. Exactly. And there's some variability with them, but at least, you know, we're not trying to get it down to perfection here. We're just trying, we've got this range to work with. We're putting on fertilizer all the time anyway. We just want to get some general idea what that pH is. And if you have a low pH or a high pH, then you can make some recommendations on how you should treat. Now, what about a tree, though? One of your trees. Let's say it's a 4-inch diameter tree. It's been there for 4 or 5 years. Would you take 10 samples or just 1? Or maybe 2 or 3?
2 around the tree.
Yeah, right around the base. You can see where those roots are going. Now, a big tree, there's some guidelines. How far beyond the drip line of the tree do the roots go? Have you ever heard this? Yeah, 3 times the drip line, usually. Or they can, potentially. Or beyond. Or beyond. They're out there. So, if you have a big tree, then, and it's chlorotic, and when I mean chlorotic, what am I talking about? What's it missing?
Iron.
Iron, usually. But chlorosis does refer to both, I mean, any kind of yellow leaf. And there's more than one thing that causes yellow leaf. Manganese will do it too. That's still a chlorotic tree. It's just, it's iron chlorosis or manganese chlorosis. That's the way they fit together. So I don't know if anybody's seen this experiment. I remember is undergraduate work. They had these, I think they were tomatoes, but they're in a long line. They're grown in water, and every single one had 1 nutrient missing out of the 16. And just to see what the symptoms are, and they're all varied. Everything that's missing had a particular symptom. But if you pulled it out, the plant's going to get sick. So people do this a lot. It gets messed up. So you take a soil sample. So I hear this in the field all the time. Property managers say, you know, these plants aren't looking good. You know, I think they're sick. Let's get a soil sample here. So you get a soil sample, and everything comes out fine as far as the things they're checking for. pH is okay. It didn't check for nitrogen, but your potassium level's fine. The phosphorus is within the range. It hasn't accumulated, so it's not toxic. But the big one is, that we see a lot around here, is what these, in this particular piece, is right above it is a wall. And right above the wall is a drive lane. And right above that is a slope. So what do you think is probably pouring off of that thing, off of there? They're putting ice melt galore. I can only imagine how much is going down. And it's coming out, and as a matter of fact, you can see the salt, kind of the salt residue weeping through that wall. So you know that soil has to be, and even if it doesn't, if you soil sampled it and you didn't specifically ask for a salt test, you're not going to get that. So I just see that all the time, you know, well, I think there's some Roundup applied here, and so let's take a soil sample. That has nothing to do with it. It does you no good. It's only testing those few things. So, but if you thought that you had a salt problem, suspected it, then it even gets a little more complicated, because what kind of salt was it? So you have to tell them what to test for. If you have a suspicion of what's there, you can give it, the soil scientist can go looking for whatever it is that you're looking for. But what if it was rock salt? What would they have to check for?
Calcium.
Yeah, sodium. Sodium. So if they go and look at the sodium test, and the sodium level's high, then great. But even making it more complicated, if that tree is a conifer, how long ago did that damage occur, probably? When you see the symptoms.
6 months.
It could have been a long time ago, that's right.
3 years.
Yeah, and let's just take a wild guess. Does sodium leach through the soil? Yes. So you have this sodium, did some damage to that tree, it's washed on through, you take a soil sample, the sodium levels are fine, so you think, oh, you know, that didn't do it. Well, that doesn't tell you whether it does or doesn't. That's the problem. And then you have all your other salts. You have your chlorides, and your calcium chloride, and sodium, or magnesium. What are some of what ice melts are you using right now?
Magnesium.
Okay. So these other salts have to be tested for too. So soluble, on the soil sample place that I work with, they have two tests. They have soluble salt tests and they have a sodium test. On the sodium test, okay. The thing I want to show here is that this is a root. What happens is this root generally lines up all these hydrogen. And it's an ion, and an ion means what? It's charged, right? It's charged. So you have positive charge ions, and they're called
Electrons.
cations. And the opposite is anions. That's right. Okay. But here's your root, and this is on your turf plant, and you have all these hydrogens piled up here. And then let's say over here you have this little particle of soil, and on the soil we have generally think of a soil, when I say soil colloid, it's kind of just one piece of particle laying on top of another one. But these have a negative charge, and they hold on to, let's say it's manganese, or let's say it's iron. Okay, iron just has a double charge, I think. Maybe not. Anyway, there's one last piece I want to cover on the soils. Is a lot of times you'll see on that soil sample, it'll say the CEC. What does that mean?
Cation
Exchange capacity. Okay, very good. So what do you... Okay, so if there's a lot of these hydrogen that lined up on this root, the root's kind of drawn them, I mean that's kind of an oversimplification, but all these hydrogens are attached to that root. If there's an exchange going on, and we've already established that this is a cation, these are the ones we want, right? So what's the root doing with the soil? It's exchanging. That's right. So it's able, you have one positive charge, it pops over here, and this iron comes back. So they talk about, a lot of times you read, it becomes soluble. Because when this is released, when this is exchanged, now that iron is floating around. It's in, it's in a soluble form, and the plant can pick it up. So, if you didn't have very many of these, so let me go back. If you have a good cation exchange capacity, what do you? This ties into our structure a little bit. You can at least pull a little bit out of it.
Means you have more available nutrients.
That's right. So let's think, if these are clay particles and they're all negatively charged, and clay particles are really, 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 really small, right? And they're stacked on top of each other and stacked on top of each other. My guess is you have a lot, they're holding all these, they're holding all those, they're getting loaded up. But you got these big old sand particles, and yeah, it has a negative charge too. But which one of these is going to hold more of these micronutrients?
Clay.
The clay. Yeah, the clay holds a bunch. So we think of clay as bad, right? Bad, bad, bad. But in reality, as far as its chemistry goes, it's really good. It holds on to nutrients. But there's only one soil that's better than clay for holding nutrients. Oh, yeah.
Salty.
No?
No.
Diatomaceous earth.
What's that?
Diatomaceous.
That would relatively be true. What are we always trying to get back in the soil? They'll always talk about. When you go get your back to earth, what is that?
Organic matter.
Compost, that's right. So the only thing that has a higher ability to hold on to nutrients besides clay is organic matter. So all these, these cotton burr holes and all this stuff, and it has a lot of surface area. Clay particles are really, really small, but on organic matter, if you were to look at it under the scope, there's little openings and pockets, and it can hold on to all kinds of stuff. So whereas clay is not so great as far as structure goes, it's pretty good chemically, but when you get organic matter, it's best of both worlds, right? It's a looser soil, so water's able to penetrate, nutrients are able to penetrate, and it can hold on to your nutrients. But that's what the cation, I just want to make sure everybody understands what the cation exchange capacity. It has a good pH, cation exchange capacity is fine, phosphorus levels are good, potassium's okay, it's all fine. And then we're thinking, yeah, but this plants just won't grow. So then we move over to the structure. Because maybe it's super, super heavy. And what happens in heavy soils? Roots are trying to break through, right? And they're not getting anywhere. So structure is equally important almost more important in a lot of ways. So structure is really important. And the easiest way, if you're ever into this, I brought a few of these, but I've done this multiple times, mainly on turf. Have you ever heard of the jar test? You can take a certain amount of soil, put it in a mason jar, screw the lid on tight, and you can measure before you put any water in. You can measure the level. Okay. Then you pour water on top of that. Take a look at that. Pour water. Shake it all up, and then just sit it on a or set it. Sit or sit. On the table. Whatever. Put it on the table. Put it right here. Put it on the table, and then in a short amount of time, what's going to drop out first? The what? What's heavy?
Sand.
Sand. So the sand drops out. Okay. What's next? Silts. And then last is clay. So the sand drops out quickly. It's super heavy. I think it's within 2 minutes. It takes 2 minutes for the sand to drop out. And then on your silts, take 2 to 4 hours for the silts to accumulate. And then finally, after you let it, just no disturbance, then the clay will finally settle out after 24 hours. And then you can look right at you'll see it. It's really cool looking. And you get some idea how heavy that soil is. If you shake it up and no sand drops out, and then 2 to 4 hours later you don't see anything that's accumulated, you got a very heavy clay soil. You have problems.
There you go.
No doubt about it. That's easy. That's a redneck test. That's the way you do it. You don't have to send it to anybody. Doesn't cost any money. You can get some idea how. So if we were to go out here, and this soil out here, put it in there, fill it up, shake it. How long do you think it take for that to
Not very long.
Not very long.
32 seconds.
Yeah, it'll go out fast, right? And that'll tell you it's very high. Okay, now that we're soil scientists, on the structure side, that's great. What about nutrient holder? Does it hold the nutrients very well? No, it doesn't. It doesn't hold nutrients very well. It wants to move on through. There's not enough of these clay particles to hold on to everything, so it moves through. So a lot of times in silty, loamy soils, not always, if your organic matter is low, which a lot of times it is, then you end up showing up with, what's the big word we were using?
Chlorosis.
Chlorosis. It happens all the time. Well, it's very, very consistent. So which is better? Yeah, which is better? To have high clay and have a nice, all these nutrients there that are available, or is it better to have it the other way, where you have better soil structure?
What did you say?
Yeah, so what's better? To have a heavy clay soil with all these nutrients that are available, has a very high cation exchange capacity, or is it better to have a loose soil, a light soil, where roots are able to penetrate great? It's a wash. It really is. I don't like the clay because a lot of times what happens when the water lands on the clay, it runs off and never gets there. So a lot of times you have water efficient soils and there's a lot of clay. It just sits there. So that's what but for us now, let's throw out the nursery. This is a unique area through here. Most of us out there in the field, what kind of soils are we dealing with? Clay. Because what? On a homeowner's lawn, what have they done?
It killed all their.
That's right.
Took it all.
Yep. So all that organic matter that we love was up there in that topsoil, nice and rich, right? They strip that all off and sell that. You guys got to go buy it back. Okay, so that's all off. Dig the foundation, get all this heavy clay that's compressed, put that up there, and then we spread that all around for us. And then you try to go in and put your sprinkler in, and you got to chisel through this stuff because it's like concrete, right? And it won't. And their roots, you're laying the sod on top, and their roots are like, holy cow! I don't even know how I'm supposed to get into this stuff. It's just rock hard. So what do? You just pour a bunch of water on it. Like I don't know if you've seen that picture. You can grow sod on a Volkswagen Bug, man. You can just lay it on there and just keep watering it. Throw some fertilizer on it. It'll grow just fine. Chia pet. That's right. But sustainability, which is the big word these days, which I really agree with, sustainability, it's terrible. So, culturally, what should we be doing and are we doing generally? Selling what? Preserving the topsoil. Let's say most of the time we don't have that option, right? You guys just get what you get. So what's our options? What do we do?
Turf varieties or something?
Turf varieties, absolutely. What else?
Amend the soil.
Amend the soil. And how do we amend the soil?
Till in compost.
Compost. How do you put compost on the top of the lawn?
Till it in.
Doesn't work too well, does it?
Well, there is one lawn left.
What's that?
There isn't any long life.
Yeah. So over the years, the thing that's come along, which became popular like 20 years ago, is core aeration. Because what's aeration do? It pulls a core, not the spoon kind that you just drive down, but actually literally pulls a core, lays that soil back up on top, right? And then it breaks down. And there's some other chemical things that can be done, but in those holes that you filled, what fills in there if you're watering? Turf roots, right? Yeah, absolutely. Because there's a lot of roots I mean, there's air there, now it can move in there, as long as you're fertilizing. So what are those roots? As they die, they become organic matter. Yeah, that's right. So aeration is a big deal. Just aerate, aerate, aerate.